We thought we could not finish the conference without talking about the United States and, I lost the title of the conference. There it is, a year out from elections. It's been a long 2 days. But we have a terrific panel here to have that discussion, moderated by my very dear friend, Pedro Botta from Florida International University.
Thank you, David. I'm so happy to be here moderating the last panel of what has been an extraordinary conference. So my hat's off to the organizers and the sponsors, and especially to Nino and her amazing team at EPRC. Last year at this conference, I moderated a similar panel looking at the then looming US midterm elections. Today, I think we have a similar task, but perhaps with a bit more urgency because there's so much at stake in the 2024 US presidential race. Very quickly, just to introduce the panel, Laura Kelly with The Hill, Colleen Graffy, Pepperdine University, Tom Malinowski with the McCain Institute, and David Merkel with Summit International Advisors. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have a lot to unpack here, and I think the best way to do it is I want to present maybe some questions and some scenarios, and let's provoke a nice conversation, a spirited conversation, and maybe some debate. And let's keep it within the spirit of the topic of this conference, defeating Putinism. So let's get into it. And let me begin with a very fundamental question. What are the issues that will drive Americans to the ballot box in 2024? And does foreign policy figure at all among those issues? So why don't we start with Laura?
You start with me? Okay.
Yeah.
I think generally that foreign policy does not really rise to the top of the issues that Americans go to the polls for, but it does provide for interesting campaign rhetoric and to show how a potential candidate will demonstrate themselves on the international stage and what their vision is for how they want the U.S. to show up on the international stage. Mm-hmm. And we have what President Biden did during the 2020 election was he promoted himself as the antithesis to Trump. He was putting human rights first, and I think people really wanted to go back to that values-based American on the international stage. But it's a question of whether Biden has really actually followed through on a lot of those promises. Mm-hmm. He gets a lot of flack for going back to relations with Saudi Arabia and the Crown mm-hmm. Prince. He's really embracing Indian Prime Minister Modi. So I can't imagine that President Biden will want to promote those kind of things, but I'm sure he'll do the America's Back slogan, and then his opponents in the Republican Party, likely to be former President Trump, also wants to bring back this toughness of America, get other people to pay for, that we're not being robbed and stuff. So that's where I see the conversation going.
Okay. Colleen, same question. What's going to bring Americans to the ballot box?
I think number one will be the economy. Mm-hmm. So if the good news about the economy actually hits the American people, or that they feel like the economy has gotten better, that will help Biden. Currently, people don't believe it. They think the economy is in a bad shape, and that will drive people to the polls, inflation, cost of food, and so on. The second issue is immigration, particularly for Americans. There's a view that the immigration system the process is still out of control, and that needs to be taken into hand. And so if Trump is there saying, look at what's happening, we need to build the wall, that will resonate with Republicans. Third issue is abortion, and that will be number one for Democrats. And we're seeing in midterm elections and in single issue elections around the abortion issues, it's bringing Democrats out, and Democrats are winning on that issue. And I would say, particularly for young people, climate change might be something that brings them out. We know that traditionally young people don't vote, but climate change is really a number one issue for young people. I teach international environmental law, mm-hmm. and I know that front and center is they want to talk about climate change. So immigration, economy, immigration, abortion, environmental.
Okay, okay. Tom, same question. What's going to bring us out to the ballot box?
Thanks, Pedro. As the only person on this panel who's actually run for office and won and lost in the last 5 or 6 years, I would say, first of all, Colleen is right. Her list of issues generally, those are the issues that rise to the top. They're economic issues, they're kitchen table issues. How does the presidency, the government of the United States affect my life? But I also believe, and this was reinforced by my experience as a practical politician, that, that foreign policy is a more important issue for American voters than the conventional wisdom would suggest. It is obviously a very big issue in the Republican primary right now. Some of the sharpest exchanges and differences and fundamental differences of philosophy that we saw in the first Republican debate were about Russia and about foreign policy. In my experience as a congressman, there were occasional foreign policy issues that rose to the top. One that I remember very clearly was the Helsinki summit, when President Trump had that bizarre moment of telling the American people that he trusted Putin more than our own military, than our own intelligence community. I had a lot of people in my little congressional district asking me, what the hell is going on? It's not that they're necessarily following the details of foreign policy every day, but they want to have a leader, particularly in the White House, who's going to defend American interest and stand strong in the world. So I think it would actually be a big mistake for President Biden not to hammer this home when, and I think it's going to be when, he is running against President Trump, to hammer home the bizarre connection between the affection that Trump has expressed for Putin and for Russia, and to hammer home the support for Ukraine, which remains very popular among the general electorate in the United States, somewhat different among the Republican primary electorate.
Okay, thank you, Tom. David, your turn.
So I'm the last panelist on the last panel. So you feel like the voters 15 months after a U.S. presidential campaign will feel, we've heard it, we want to move on, but now it's my turn. I think that Tom's right with regard to foreign policy, and not to repeat things. What's the most important foreign policy issue, according to a recent poll, is American jobs and protecting American business. This plays into great power competition and issues with China, and it also plays into the desire for U.S. leadership, that the U.S. Wants to play a role internationally. When pollsters ask if we should focus on issues at home, people naturally say yes, but we don't look at it as one or the other, because then they'll ask, do you think it's important to do these things internationally? And as Tom suggested, 75% of Americans think that victory in Ukraine is important and is in our interest, and that includes supermajorities in both the Republican and Democrat electorate, with independents not as strong.
Okay, thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the American voter. You know, we are notorious for voter apathy, and when I hear the last 2 days how important these elections are for Ukraine, for Georgia, here we are in Georgia, okay, and you feel it. The world is watching what the U.S. is doing and where it's going to go, and yet we Americans just maybe doesn't really enter our mind exactly that way. So my concern is that Americans are not really looking at the situation in Ukraine, that this idea of defeating Putinism doesn't compute for them, and are they going to come out to vote? And I think there's strange things in our system that contribute perhaps to that culture of apathy. You know, this idea, my vote doesn't really matter. And Colleen, I'm going to pick on you. Let's talk a little bit about some of these dysfunctions.
Unfortunately, we have crippling partisan politics in the United States, and it's damaging to America, not just domestically, but internationally. And I think of our founding fathers having created this brilliant political system because they envisioned the potential rise of a demagogue and populism. And so they created these fire breaks between the branches. So you have 2 years vote for House of Representatives, 6 years for the Senate, 4 years for the presidency, lifetime for judges. And so there's these fire breaks to prevent any demagogue rising and capturing the nation all at once. What they warned against was political parties, so they didn't address that. But I think that if they had addressed creating something in our political voting election system to create the sort of level playing field and foundation that we need, they would look at our open primary system, our closed primary system, where you only have Republicans voting for Republican in the primary, Democrats voting for Democrat, very little turnout. The most extreme come out, they vote for the most extreme candidate. Those states that have adopted open primaries, you see a different approach towards the politics. Secondly, we have first past the post voting, which means most people, to your point, say, what's the point of me coming out? My vote doesn't count. But ranked choice voting, RCV, ranked choice voting, allows everyone to put their first choice and a second choice and a third choice so that your vote actually counts. And 2 states have adopted this, Maine and Alaska, and we can look at where they have open primary and ranked choice voting, and you're going to actually hear politicians that are willing to compromise. And finally, gerrymandering is the cancer on the United States voting system. And this gerrymandering, as those of you that know, it basically carves up the electoral district by Democratic or Republicans. And what we need is to take all this fantastic AI that we're hearing about and saying, let's just put into the AI system how many constituents and the community, water, schools, heritage, whatever it is, boom. So non-political boundary commissions that are creating the electoral districts will mean we don't have someone like Jim Jordan. He can do anything and he will be elected because it's closed primaries, so all he has to worry about is the more extreme person to his right and being primaried. It's now a verb. And with first past the post, he will be in, and with gerrymandering, he can do anything. So slowly but slowly, there are citizens that are trying to go state by state and change this so that we create a sort of foundation that we should have in our country in order to be able to have compromise and solve our political problems.
Okay, thank you. I want to see if anyone else on the panel wanted to respond to Colleen's comments.
I love those ideas. I represented one of the very few congressional districts that was basically 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans. And I loved that because it forced me to speak to both sides if I wanted to stay in office. Then it was redistricted to become unbalanced. And so we need more of those. We need more of these experiments. There are some other good ones out there that Americans have been debating. The difficulty, of course, is that to implement any of these changes, you need the current partisan structures to agree to them. And it's often not in their interest. I mean, if you have a Congress that has been elected through gerrymandering, that Congress is less than 50-50 likely to eliminate the system under which they've been elected.
Unless you have the Supreme Court, as we have in Florida, that are coming in and saying that redistricting is unconstitutional and pushing back.
Exactly.
So I agree with you, but there are ways we are
there are structural
challenging.
changes that would help. There's a whole conversation about our media environment and the fact that we are getting our news filtered through social media in a way that reinforces our partisan divisions, in a way that reinforces our hatred of the other side. And my great regret from my time in Congress was that we did not take that on as strongly as we should have.
Excellent. Laura, any thoughts?
Well, since I'm most focused on foreign policy, it's mostly I'm looking at how other countries are watching our elections, and and worried about it. So all of these ideas, I think, are necessary.
David.
I'm struck by a question David asked of Chris earlier, and thinking about the primary process and the polarization of our media and social media. David asked Chris Socha if we had a Putin problem or a Russia problem, and I'm a Republican, but I think the question is, do we have a Trump problem or a Republican problem? And I would argue strongly that we have a Trump problem, but the nominating process on both sides of the fence, there's a lot of attention, and rightfully so, on what has produced Donald Trump as the nominee, and what might produce Donald Trump this go around. And he has such a lead that if successful, he could be successful even before the 91 felony cases against him even go to a jury. So he could be a nominee and then a convicted felon before the general election. But also there's something in the system where only 25% of the American people want Joe Biden to be the nominee, and he's the least popular at this point in time of any modern president, with the exception of Jimmy Carter and Donald Trump, two one-term presidents. So I think that a whole-scale approach on perhaps what we can do in the nominating process. You know, I don't want to speak for the Democratic Party, but to bring both parties back to speaking for a larger section of the country.
Okay, thank you.
If I may
please.
just add something on media and media bias and people kind of going into their own echo chambers. I will say that I write for The Hill, and it is seen as a pretty down-the-middle publication when we're compared to other places. But what we also see is that readers don't really invest a lot of time in reading articles in depth, and what drives the most traffic are kind of short, pitchy headlines about breaking news of the day. And I think that when people just grab onto those headlines and they don't understand, or they don't take the time to read about the larger issues, then they just kind of roll with that. And that's hard when you're trying to educate people about policies and how policies are made and what is going to affect them.
Indeed. It's getting back to the issue of foreign policy as a ballot box issue. Today, where do most Americans stand on the issue of support for Ukraine? There was a recent CNN poll that I came across that indicated that the majority of Americans oppose more U.S. aid for Ukraine. And the reason cited is the fear of protracted entanglement in this what they see as a foreign conflict. So where are Americans on this issue?
That poll is an outlier.
Okay.
We've seen across the polls that have been taken in the last several weeks and months, the very strong majority of Americans support helping Ukraine. The support is stronger among Democrats than Republicans, but among Republicans it is still over 50% in most of the polls that I've seen. Whether this is decisive in terms of what the Congress will do in the coming weeks is a second question that we need to discuss. But the good news is most Americans, still on a bipartisan basis, support helping Ukraine.
Okay. David?
Just to add on to Tom's point, the thing that's really exciting is the polls are supportive of the U.S. In Ukraine. And if they learn a little bit more, if they learn that only 3% of the defense budget goes to supporting Ukraine, if they learn that Ukraine is holding on to 83% of their territory, that is degrading Russia's military, then it goes up. It goes up by 12% among Democrats, 18% among Republicans, and 5% among independents. So two things, and success in the counteroffensive, and a clear message that's been talked about throughout this conference, a clear message by the president about Ukraine, about the goals in Ukraine, and spoken in a way where folks in the congressman's district don't have to say, I'm standing up for the liberal international order. People in Mississippi are not going to capture that. But if we talk about democracy, making sure that Russia doesn't invade another neighbor, these are things that people will support. And when they learn more about what the Ukrainians are doing and what the money is going for, the support increases, which means the president needs to speak more about it.
Colleen.
I'm a little more alarmed. All of our discussion about disinformation, if I were Putin, the number one thing I would be doing would be pushing this crack wider for the Republicans to be viewing Ukraine as a negative. Why are we there? There's two corrupt countries fighting one another. What you hear in America includes Russia had to invade because Ukraine had biological weapons. Believe me, I've heard it. We're pouring money in and it's going into a Swiss bank account. And so we know the disinformation that Putin is creating. And you know that this has got to be a number one goal, is to ensure that this narrative, negative narrative on Ukraine takes hold. And it might be, we're seeing the Republican leadership tempering, many not, but some, tempering what they say, and often the best way they can express it to sort of placate the MAGA base, but also to be pro-Ukraine, is to say, well, we support Ukraine, but we're worried about accountability and transparency. And so I would say and whoever wins as president, if it's a Republican, they're going to have this narrative at the core of the base. And even if once they become president, they will be supportive, who's in Congress? What does it look like after the elections? Do they have a majority in Congress that's going to support this? So I think we have to start strong in cracking this disinformation that we know is taking place, and we know will only spiral upwards as we get closer to the elections.
Laura, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I do agree that support for Ukraine among the American public remains high, and probably higher than other conflicts or other areas where the U.S. has been involved. But it also falls in priorities and the headlines. And so even though there may be support there, it gets overtaken by all these other issues, competing crises, and all of these other more immediate things. And so you go back to what's happening in Ukraine, and now it's a year and a half, and the war is still going on, and it's expected to go on for much longer. And a lot of what we're talking about over these past 2 days is that the administration, people are critical that they have not articulated a strategy of what we're actually going towards. We're going to support Ukraine as long as it takes, but really that is until Election Day 2024, and then we see how we're supporting Ukraine again. And then I think the partisanship is confusing for people. We heard Chris Socha say from Republican staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that the majority in Congress support Ukraine, but that there's just a small but vocal minority. But they also have the power to cause chaos and disrupt and make up roadblocks that slow things down. And of course, there's the criticisms that the Biden administration is moving too slow as well. Right. So I think all of these things start to confuse people, and then we can't put forward that message, or Ukraine supporters have trouble putting forward that message of this is the existential fight that the world is in.
Yeah, that was my next follow-up question. Can Americans make that leap? We can see a country that's been illegally and brutally invaded by another, but can Americans make that leap that this is a greater existential situation? That we're looking at the security of Europe. We're looking at controlling, somehow containing authoritarianism. Is that something that we're doing a good job at, or?
We need to be doing a better job. As someone mentioned on a panel earlier, that's being articulated by Biden overseas.
Yeah.
Because he realizes that it doesn't resonate the same way domestically, and we need to have brave leadership to say, this is what's at stake. And we have some that are doing that, Chris Christie and others, Nikki Haley, but it needs to be really, a message has to be repeated 8 times until it sort of sinks in. So we need a lot more of that happening in the U.S.
Yeah. And maybe the Russia-China nexus, that breaks through. If,
Yes,
if you say China, people pay attention.
Yes.
Okay. Tom, any thoughts?
Yeah, sure, Joe Biden should give a speech in Chicago, but let's not pretend that that's the problem. Look, I'm optimistic, but there is a serious problem. And the problem is not that Joe Biden hasn't articulated a strategy or an argument for helping Ukraine. It's not that that argument is hard for Americans to understand. Most Americans embrace that argument. The China piece, they understand that if we let Putin take over Ukraine, we're letting China take over Taiwan, and that's economic chaos. The problem is that one of our 2 major political parties has been taken over by somebody who supports Putin. And a growing number of members of that party, particularly in the House of Representatives, either agree with that man or are terrified of him, too terrified of him to challenge what is kind of the emerging feeling in the base of their party. And when it comes to voting for the money, it's going to be a close run thing.
You know, when I was at the State Department, Bill Burns used to always say, we can admire the problem or we can try and solve it. So we can keep on admiring this problem with Trump, which exists and is real, and exists as Tom and Colleen and others have said in a part of the Republican Party. But what is also true is that support for Ukraine is real. It has a supermajority among the identified Democrats and Republicans in the population, and it increases if they learn something about the war. There's been a lot of talk, which is unfair because you know we're not in Ukraine, and I'm not a military strategist, but obviously people like backing success, and if the counter insurgency has success, I think you'll see the numbers in Europe and the U.S. go up. But I think that speaking about U.S. interests from the Oval Office, from the President, is much more important than Tom suggests. On your point, on the 40th anniversary of the D-Day invasion, someone who thought that words from a president were important, Reagan said that isolationism is never will be, never has been, and never will be an appropriate response to tyrannical powers with a expansionist desire. So I think that we need to learn in the American population, the Republican voters, hopefully even MAGA Trump supporters, need to recognize that our future is tied up in Ukrainians' victory, and that if we don't do everything we can to support Ukraine, then the battle's not over, and it's going to come closer to us and closer to NATO. And I do think that there's more that can be done. I also think that not in a bad way, but I think that the president's political future in some way is tied to this war. He has done a fantastic job in putting together our alliances and working with our allies. And while many people have mentioned that we wish that he'd been quicker on things and think less about what Moscow is going to react to, or how Moscow's going to react to what we're doing, you know, there's a lot to compliment. And therefore, if there is success in Ukraine, it goes first and foremost, of course, to the people of Ukraine, but the Biden administration will share in that success.
Great, thank you. Perfect segue to explore some scenarios. Okay, so scenario number one. This is the second coming of Donald Trump, okay, performing his first miracle and ending the war in Ukraine within 24 hours. What will a Trump presidency look like for Ukraine? What's going to happen?
Well, first of all, before we get into the what if, I do want to stress, I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, can we do that first?
Okay, sure. Let's give everybody a little.
It's not going to happen.
I mean,
a little
if
good
it does.
news.
It is a possibility. There's an anecdote that I would tell to my worried constituents whenever something like this came up. It's something that Abraham Lincoln said in the final weeks of the Civil War. He was asked, "Did you ever think that the Union would lose?" And he said, "No. I always thought there was just enough virtue in the Republic to save it. Sometimes none to spare, but enough for the emergency." And we've had in the United States, in the last 2018, 2020, 2022, we've had 3 just enough virtue elections where decency of intelligence of the American people manifested itself. It was not a perfect outcome from anybody's point of view. I won 2 of those. I lost 1 of them. But basically, we got through the emergency, and I think we will again. But to answer your question directly, if I'm wrong, if we have a second Trump term, we will be extremely nostalgic for the first Trump term. Because the first Trump term was constrained by the fact that he was surrounded by normal Republican officials who kept him from doing a lot of the crazy things he wanted to do. Those people were systematically removed. The final one was Secretary of Defense Esper. When he was fired at the end of the administration, the White House put out a statement saying he was fired because he was trying to prevent the president from reconciling with Russia, and he was trying to prevent the president from pulling our troops out of Europe. So what will happen? That's what will happen. We will, of course, no longer be helping Ukraine. Some of us will be asking Ukraine for help. But I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay.
And it's on us to make sure it doesn't. All of us, Republicans and Democrats.
I'll just
Laura.
say that as a thought exercise, if Trump was reelected and he has this promise to make peace with Putin within 24 hours, he doesn't have to fulfill his campaign promises. He said that he would make peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and it didn't happen. He did do something else. He had the Abraham Accords, and that was a whole other scenario of how that came about. But it would, I think if we follow the thread of what could happen if within the first couple of days of his new administration, he decided to fly to Moscow and meet with Putin and try to negotiate all these things, then it would be incumbent upon the international community to start making their reactions. And that's something that's hard to filter out. But that's what I think about 24 hours of in peace.
Okay. Colleen.
I'm going to go with the wishful thinking exercise and remind everyone that at this point in the previous election, Clinton machinery was unbeatable. No one could beat Hillary Clinton. And Obama, of course, won the election. So it is still early days. I know Trump is polling 50, 40, 60%, but it's early days. And if we see on the debate stage these other candidates, people become curious. People thought Nikki Haley was very attractive, and they don't see Trump, and there's just more baggage with 91 charges and 4 indictments, that perhaps the spell breaks and they just consider it's too much baggage. So my hope is that between now and then there is some sort of a cracking of this Trump machine. And also, even Ron DeSantis being down in the polls, he's got a huge super PAC war chest. I think he has $83 million. So he has staying power. He's going to be able to make it through. And once we see what happens in Iowa and New Hampshire, the first primaries, there may be someone who takes a lead that's not Trump, and suddenly we get some momentum in another direction.
Well, I'm going to follow suit and say.
Yes, of course.
My wife, Claire Seckler Merkel, worked on 3 presidential campaigns, George Herbert Walker Bush and 2 of Senator McCain, with 2008 being senior staff and Cindy McCain's chief of staff. So all that to say you have the wrong Merkel up on stage. But since I have a mic, I'll go ahead and go for it. I think, I'm with Colleen. I think that I'm still not convinced that Trump is going to be the nominee. It is correct that no candidate has had this kind of a lead and not won the nomination. But I don't think there's been a candidate that's had 91 felony charges facing him. I found the announcement of Governor Nikki Haley very underwhelming, but I found her first campaign appearance or first debate very attractive. And the news reported that the Biden campaign, she's their worst nightmare, and one can understand why. Biden would get undressed debating against Nikki Haley, and as a South Asian Indian woman, it'd be very difficult to use the talking points that Biden would use against Trump. If I'm wrong, and Trump wins, and I do think if it's a Trump-Biden election, Trump has a very good chance of beating Biden. I think that Biden was the right candidate to run against Trump last time because Trump motivated the Democrats to go and vote, and Biden kept the Republicans sitting on their hand or voting for Biden. I think that there's such a buyer's remorse with Biden among his own base and among Republicans that may not happen in the same numbers last time. With regard to what that would mean for Ukraine, I think that Tom has a good point about what his cabinet would look like. I'm curious what cabinet would get through the Senate, and I think the adults in the room would need to be over in the Senate, and perhaps not in the cabinet. I was just last point. I was the last senior official to meet with Niyazov Turkmenbashi in Turkmenistan, and he would have his whole cabinet around the table, and anytime he mentioned their name, they'd hop up and like write down everything he said. And I said, wow, you'd never see that in America. And we kind of did see that in the Roosevelt room with Trump. So I'm fearful of what a cabinet would look like in a second Trump administration, but I have greater confidence in the Senate and perhaps a continuation of them putting some guardrails on Trump.
But which Senate would we have and which Congress would we have? And if it's a Republican-controlled Senate, who are the top Republicans? Are they going to push back against Trump? And then if they do push back against Trump, is Trump, if he was, reelected, would he just appoint people in acting positions and just be chaotic?
Well, just one final point. The other thing, which is hugely problematic on the financial side for Ukraine, is the 30 Democrats, and I don't want to get this wrong, but the 30 Democrats in the House that were concerned about funding for Ukraine, given other priorities, and then withdrew their letter because of President Biden. I think that they may be unwilling to support Ukraine as well. So I think in the House side, you'd have a great number of Democrats and perhaps even more Republicans that would be problematic on funding.
David wants us to go to the audience, but before we do that, I want to think of a happier scenario.
Oh.
Joe Biden wins re-election. Is this a panacea for Ukraine? Tommy, please.
There's no panacea for anything, anytime. Look, the best case scenario for Ukraine, for NATO, for Europe is Biden wins re-election, because I'm assuming Nikki Haley is not going to be the nominee, with a Democratic House, and the Senate could go either way, because I think a Republican Senate from this point of view would be fine. But that best case scenario is not going to manifest itself until January of 2025. We have a problem right now. Despite my optimism about the American people, and despite the frankly spin you heard elsewhere, you heard earlier today, we have a very significant problem in the House of Representatives. The good news is, if you put Ukraine assistance to a vote today, it would win, maybe 300 to 100. The bad news is, getting Ukraine assistance to a vote is incredibly difficult given the rules of the House, given the fact that, I don't want to get into too many weeds, but our Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, gave up a lot of his powers to the MAGA, American First, anti-Ukraine caucus of his party in order to become Speaker. And I can tell you, as someone who served in the House, it's very hard for me to see the mechanism for bringing that to a vote without jeopardizing Kevin McCarthy's hold as Speaker. Necessity will have to be somehow the mother of invention. We are all going to have to put pressure on McCarthy and the Republican leadership, reminding them that if they don't do this, that they will be held responsible for Putin winning. And in the meantime, and this is something I stress all the time, all of us here are pro-Ukraine. I think all of us here want Joe Biden to be doing more for Ukraine. That's all right. But I think most of us here also assume that Joe Biden, if he wanted to give Ukraine F-16s, he could. If he wanted to give them all this additional stuff, he could. That is actually not true. He is operating within a budget that Congress has appropriated. That money is almost gone. A squadron of F-16s would cost $2 to $3 billion. That would eat up almost all of the money that he has left to spend. An ATACMS missile is $1 million a shot. And so he's got a very difficult dilemma. If he were to do all these things right now, he would then not be able to provide artillery ammunition, bullets, mine-clearing equipment, drones, the things that Ukrainian infantry soldiers depend on for survival, or the money would run out even sooner, and we have to face this dilemma in the House of Representatives next week rather than maybe in October. So keep that in mind. This is the main flashpoint right now. It's not the presidential election. It's whether we can get this next tranche of money through the House. And if we do, we're going to have to do it again next spring, in the middle of the presidential election, which I think has to influence a lot of our strategic decisions about how we support Ukraine, about NATO membership, which I think should come sooner rather than later, in part because of these uncertainties. Ultimately, for me, NATO membership is the greatest insurance policy against both Putin and Trump.
Thank you. Questions? Okay. Evelyn.
Okay, as somebody who ran for Congress unsuccessfully and experienced foreign Russian interference in my election, which was not why I lost, I'm curious what the panelists are observing, what your fears are with regard to foreign interference in the U.S. elections. And thank you, by the way, for an awesome conversation.
Who'd like to start?
Sure. I have great fear, as I expressed earlier, and I would look to accountability for the social media, in particular the algorithms. It's the algorithms that are creating this echo chamber for the disinformation. So I would like to see something tackled there early on.
We made a lot of progress, yes. We made a lot of progress as a country from 2016 to 2022 in addressing foreign disinformation through social media. Unfortunately, in the last year or two, we've moved backwards. Twitter, I'm going to still call it that. We all see what's happening right now, where Elon Musk's latest campaign is to try to banish the Anti-Defamation League from Twitter. That's how bad it's gotten. Facebook has totally disinvested from content moderation, which was insufficient to begin with, because you're right, the algorithms were the big problem. And so I don't know what that means for 2024. I think the reason they disinvested is because at first they were afraid Congress was going to regulate them, and then we didn't do it, and it cost money. So why do it? I'm particularly worried, frankly, about what that will mean outside the United States, in countries where American social media companies have contributed to mass killing and genocide. But even in the United States in 2024, we have to be even more vigilant. And my hope, my advice to President Biden is to run against Facebook, run against Twitter, run against all of these platforms, which are very unpopular with the American people. If you ask them, do you like them or not?
But
and
they
really
all use
hold
it.
Really, yes, we all use it, but bashing them is actually very popular. Keep them on the defensive. Make them do the things that they did in 2020 and 2022 at least to keep us safe.
Okay. David.
Thank you. It was mentioned earlier in the conference that since Putin didn't pay a cost for the war here in 2008, had the reset, didn't see a price for Syria, or 2014, he moved on to what happened in February of 2023. There was also no cost for engaging in our presidential elections. The recent studies have shown, and this isn't really all that encouraging, but the recent studies have shown that our population is so polarized and so skeptical that even deep fakes won't really influence voters. They're so used to being lied to that it doesn't really penetrate that much. And that while social media does generate talking points and attitudes within clusters and within certain parties, it's still the media which is tribal, but it's still newspapers and like The Hill, good newspapers like The Hill, and television that more voters depend on than social media. And I couldn't agree more about the social media, but with regard to Twitter, you get a lot more supporters of banning Twitter among older voters than the 18 to 24 voters. So you have to be a little bit cautious with that one.
It's big business for them. They have careers as influencers on social media. So, down with the social media companies, down with a big money maker. But I wrote an article the other day about how Russians were following Prigozhin's death and what narratives they were grabbing onto. And there's an organization called filterlabs.ai that uses artificial intelligence to comb through social media conversations of Russians to see what are the dominant narratives. And what they found was in the first few hours of Prigozhin's death, of the plane crash, that the narrative that it was an accident was the dominant narrative. But within a few days, it had really just kind of gone into a whole bunch of different narratives. And there was no one dominant theme, especially not an accident theme that was really being pushed by the Kremlin. And so Jonathan Tubner is his name, is the CEO of this company. He was saying that it shows the weakness of Russia's ability to carry out these disinformation campaigns, and that are probably further weakened by Prigozhin being dead and the breakdown of the Internet Research Agency that was used in 2016. The more worrying aspect, and I'm sure this was discussed on the previous panel, but I was doing a little bit of work during that time, so I didn't get to hear it, is China. And China has seems to have a much greater grasp on being able to run disinformation campaigns. So how that's applied to the U.S., hopefully there are people that are, guarding against it.
Right. Next question, Hiro.
Thank you for great presentation. Hiro Akita from Tokyo. So, two questions. One, when weather forecast says that there is a 20% or 30% possibility that big hurricane will hit us, definitely we'll try to prepare. So, first question is, how could and should we prepare for the Trump era so that alliance can endure 4 years or 8 years? And the second question is, even if Mr. Trump gets defeated at the presidential election, but those people who support Mr. Trump, voters will remain and keep influencing. So I wonder how do you assess that impact on foreign policy? Thank you.
The endurance of Trumpism. David.
Great question. In kind of traveling in Europe, one thing that people point out is definitely Trump is different. I mean, Trump is a different thing completely, but they highlight the fact that the U.S. has retrenched from Obama, and obviously the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which were unpopular in Europe and unpopular in the United States, is a reason for that. So while Trump was very, very different, so is Biden as far as focusing on alliances and moving and engaging with allies to do something internationally. So when Europe looks at this and they look at a post, are they looking at a Trump presidency? Certainly, but are we going back to, is Biden the new norm, or is kind of Obama-Trump more retrenchment the norm that Europe should get used to, and therefore should Europe look at a time period that Merkel talked about of doing things without the reliability of U.S. leadership? It's a big question. Obviously, from my perspective, I think American leadership is crucial, and it's been very effective and important in Ukraine. But it's an important question for Europe to ask.
Anyone else?
I guess I'll say I still am surprised when I ask this question to officials, how are you preparing? And they still come back with the answer that American leadership is crucial. And so I say, okay, are you not preparing? But Hiro, you must know better than anyone. The Japanese were very, very good at making inroads with former President Trump, and they really prepared for him coming in 2016. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day about how different countries are starting to prepare, maybe not even for Trump, but for Republican president, for Republican majorities, and taking a different approach than they did in 2016 to have better relationships with them. So maybe that's one way that they're doing it.
Okay. Colleen?
Sure. I'm still in denial, but we have to remember that what brought Trump to the fore was he was able to listen and hear what people's concerns were out in rural America, the open border, the immigration, the economy, and he spoke to that. And then it became a cult of personality. And so I believe that if this sort of hypnotism could end, I think of the many times I went to East Berlin and East Germany and was told, communism's great, it's great, it's great, it's great. Then the wall came down and was like, oh, no, well, we never believed in it. No, it was horrible. So I'm hoping it's that same moment. Or if that analogy doesn't work, the Barbie film, when Ken takes over Barbie land and all of the Barbies are hypnotized. So anyway, I'm hoping this spell can break. And because when we look at the damage that Trump did, when Biden was elected, just as you say, so many of the allies were figuring out how do we work together without the United States. So a second Trump administration with no guardrails would be incredibly, incredibly dangerous. So I think that the Republican base will, if there's a candidate that will speak to their concerns, will be listening to them, but doesn't have the baggage, and also that the message gets through that Trump has lost everything, except for 2016, which was close. He lost in the midterms, he lost the presidency, the House, the Senate, he lost everything. And even after his presidency, the midterms. So he's a loser, as he would call himself.
Yeah.
And so when someone can come in listening to the concerns and be a winner, like Nikki Haley, 2 terms, and escaping out of the Trump administration unscathed and not being Twitter fired, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to step in, but Colleen, Trump got more votes than any other president's candidate in history.
Yeah, but Biden
except
got more.
for Joe Biden.
Yeah,
Right.
but Biden got more. That was just the turnout.
Yeah.
Look,
Tom.
I don't think it's 30%. I think it's less than that. I disagree with Colleen about the spell breaking in the Republican primary. I do think he'll be the nominee.
All right,
But-
we better put a bet on that just for fun. I don't know what it is.
I don't know.
A
Okay,
latte.
we'll figure it out later. But you alluded to something very important. The one time he won, whether you agreed with him or not, he was talking about your problems.
Yep.
He was talking about immigration. He was talking about rebuilding infrastructure, creating jobs, getting rid of unfair trade deals, things that resonated with the American people, including some themes that Democrats had run on in the past. Now it is not about you, it is about me. It's about himself. It's about his own grievances. Vote for me so that I can get revenge on my enemies. That is not a winning general election message, especially for someone who lost the last time around. But again, there is a non-trivial chance. Your question is valid because of that. I think there aren't that many things you can do because it would be a terrible hurricane. But as I mentioned before, one thing that we've talked about a lot in this conference, I already mentioned it, get Ukraine into NATO as quickly as possible, because at least then you would have, even if the United States pulls back from NATO, you would have a stronger European pillar of NATO with a country that has arguably the strongest military in NATO right now, that is fighting for all our values. Hold it together while we bring America back. And here, maybe a small aside, I think the Biden administration did something brilliant at the Vilnius summit. By making the United States at least temporarily opposed to immediate Ukrainian NATO membership, they guaranteed that France would be for it. So now we've got France, and we just need to bring the Biden administration along by the Washington summit. And again, that is an insurance policy against a lot of different negative scenarios.
Okay. I think we're at the end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great panel. Pedro, thank you very much for moderating it. We are at the end. This has been 2 long days, but 2 terrific days, I hope you'll agree. We're very grateful for all of you being here. To the Rooms Hotel and Stamba, a huge thanks for being such a great host over these days. To the great team over here, thank you so much for a really flawless performance, so thank you. And the whole wait staff and everybody. So we just want to say thanks, but go ahead.
Well, I really want to echo thanks that I gave with the speakers present yesterday evening to the wonderful Nino Evgenidze. She is the woman who makes this happen year after year. She is the tamada of every meal we have had together. And really, this is an opportunity for all of us to learn a lot from one another, but more importantly, to get energy and strength from one another and to go forth in the spirit of Senator John McCain with full frankness, with full fearlessness, to go into the world and to explain the challenges that we all face together and what we must do together to address them. So thank you, Nino, and thank you, David.
Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you to the EPRC amazing team, Irina, Tamara, Lisa, Zaza, Gigi, everybody who were in charge of all this. I'm just getting the credits, you know. And Thanks to our we are very grateful to our donors. The U.S. Embassy to Georgia, UK Embassy to Georgia, NATO, Open Society Foundations, Open Society Georgia Foundations, Rooms Hotel, Tricolor Studio, who always every year makes this amazing a piece of art, political art. And last but not least, many thanks to mastermind of this conference, David Kramer, because whenever I myself say the word dignity, I mean the David Kramer. When I say the word democracy, I mean David Kramer.
Time to go.
And thank you, David, for your friendship, for your support, Evelyn, and hope to see you next year. And thank you so much for making this big trip to come to Georgia and to support us. We appreciate and we are very grateful. And we never forget our friends who were in good and bad times with us. Thank you so much.